My approach to religious education and children and youth ministry is twofold. On the one hand, I think it's really important to instill in them a sense of independence and agency in their faith. They need their own space to meet, their own times of meeting, their own ways of meeting. You know, our kids are on a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, just like us, and that's not always going to look like showing up to a sanctuary and rising to sing a hymn. Some days it's going to look like drawing animals on the walls, and some days it's going to look like hanging out and eating pizza. And I think it's really important to make space and time for them to do that. But on the other hand, I think it's equally important to remind our kids that they are part of something bigger than just themselves, a multi-generational community and a big, ever-expanding faith. And I think it's also pretty important to remind us stodgy adults that we are part of something bigger, something multi-generational and ever-growing, ever-expanding. So that said, just as kids need their own space, their own chapel time, their own hangout room, they also do need, and I will say want, to be part of our congregational life and sit in the pews on Sunday morning and be a part of worship services. I think multi-generational worship services are really important for our community growth. I think having worked in religious education primarily in my ministerial career, I've seen a lot of churches struggling with how to involve their kids in church life. And often there's this upstairs, downstairs divide that exists in churches where on some Sundays you don't even see children. And like I said, sometimes that's fine, but I think it's important for us to remember that we're all each other's teachers and we're all each other's students. Something that's also just always in the back of my head when I'm working with children and youth and figuring out the best way to go about religious education is our families, right? The parents who sometimes can barely get their kids to church and don't have time to make it to coffee hour. Sometimes they're practically as unseen as their children are in church settings. And so having multi-generational worship, having childcare always available at church events, having multi-generational church activities, sacred suppers, classes, game night, reminds us of who is here, what needs exists, what emotions are happening for people in our beloved community. So sometimes, religious education isn't on the mind of all ministers, but I have to tell you, it's very much on my mind, because without our kids, without our families, where would we be? And where would we be going? So it takes a village, and I want to invite everyone to think about these questions with me this year, should you call me as your minister. Think about how we can get involved in our children's lives and how we also can separate ourselves from them so they can go on and do their thing. It's a conundrum, but it's a fun conundrum.